The topic for today is cerebrovascular disease diagnostic evaluation. Coming to the introduction, the various diagnostic modalities available and which are commonly used ones are duplex ultrasound, MRI, CT angiography, DSA, that is digital subtraction angiography, and transcranial Doppler. So all the 5 imaging modalities which I have told you, which will be discussed under these side headings, these are the various indications for them. So that the first one will be their indication in coronary artery disease, vertebrobasilar disease, role in screening, and their role in trauma, and their role in the evaluation of carotid body or glomus vagal tumors, and how are they play a role in planning of surgical intervention, and for evaluating plaque morphology, their perioperative role and postoperative role, and their contraindications with accuracy and limitations. So coming to the first imaging modality, that is duplex ultrasound. So before we go into the subject proper, let us know about the normal findings of a carotid Doppler. Internal carotid artery, the Doppler will have a low resistance signal because brain is basically a low resistance vascular bed. And the PSV of normal ICA is less than 125 centimeter per second with a shallow upswing and a relatively high end diastolic velocity. ECA will show a high resistance signal as it supplies a high resistance vascular bed in the face with a sharp systolic upswing and a low end diastolic velocity. Common carotid artery is a combination of both as it supplies both the ICA and the ECA. Coming to the vertebral artery, the PSV, normal PSV is about 40 to 60 centimeters with a low resistance waveform. And in the subclavian artery, the PSV is about 80 to 150 centimeter per second with a bi or triphasic waveform and a prominent reverse component. Now coming to the first indication, that is carotid artery disease. This is like there can be an ICA stenosis or an ICA occlusion where the findings will differ. So stenosis, carotid stenosis is determined by the ratio of internal lumen in the stenosis to lumen in the more distal arteries. So B mode can actually accurately diagnose any stenosis which is less than 50%. But as the stenosis increases, it is very unreliable. Therefore, you require the Doppler velocities to grade for the stenosis severity. Now, what are the features of a duplex ultrasound in an ICA occlusion? Are that there will be B mode echoes from the occlusive plaque and thrombus throughout the ICA. There will be no color or spectral Doppler signal within the ICA. There will be high resistance CCA waveform with reversed or absent diastolic flow, low velocity, high amplitude signal at the ICA origin, meniscus appearance of the color at the ICA origin. There will be longitudinal pulsations rather than the axial expansion of the occluded ICA. Now, there are various criteria for diagnosing carotid stenosis severity, but this is the one which is given in our textbook Rutherford. That is what we are more concerned is this 50 to 69% stenosis and the greater than 70% stenosis. In the 50 to 69, the PSV of ICA will be 125 to 230 with a PSV ratio of being about 2 to 4 and the end diastolic velocity of about 40 to 100 centimeter per second. When it is greater than 70% stenosis, the PSV is greater than 230 with a PSV ratio of ICA CCA greater than 4 and the end diastolic velocity being greater than 100. When there is total occlusion, the PSV is undetectable. The PSV ratio is also not applicable and the end diastolic velocity is also not applicable. The criteria which I have discussed above has been validated by Abu Rahma et al., who told that this criteria can accurately diagnose any stenosis greater than 70%. But whenever the complication occurs, whenever you are dealing with a 50% to 69% stenosis, the accuracy for this stenosis can be improved by changing the PSV from 125 to 230 centimeter per second to 140 to less than 230 centimeter per second. As you can see here, that is what I'm telling you, 50 to 69% stenosis here is 125 to 230. So when you change it from 125 to 230 to 140 to less than 230, the accuracy increases. Now, duplex ultrasound is a first-line imaging modality for any stenosis which is between 70% to 99% because of the following features of it. That is, because of its low cost, because of the high number of strokes which can be prevented in the long term, because it is easy to perform, therefore more patients can be pushed rapidly for surgery. There will be robustness in sensitivity analysis. and its ability to match the needs of the current surgery. Now, so this is something which is very important. Whenever you are dealing with a 50% to 69% stenosis, you should see the time gap between the first you perform the scan and the timing of the surgery, I mean the surgical intervention. If this delay is more than 4 weeks, then you need to do a corroborative imaging, that is either an MR angiography or a CT angiography, to once again double confirm the stenosis severity. But if the time gap is less than 4 weeks, you can straight away proceed to any surgical intervention based on the duplex ultrasound alone. Coming to the next indication, that is a vertebrobasilar disease. Duplex ultrasound in vertebral artery gives very limited information about the flow dynamics. And in the basilar system, it actually gives no information. And it is not always possible to image the vertebral artery origins. And only that part of the vertebral artery which runs between the transverse process can be imaged distally. So now what is the use in this vertebrobasilar disease is that duplex ultrasound can only help you in excluding coexistent carotid disease. So for actual vertebrobasilar symptoms, you require a diagnostic imaging with MRA or CT angiography. And whenever there is any proximal subclavian or innominate artery disease, it is useful in demonstrating complete or partial vertebral artery flow reversal. Next indication of the role in screening. As such, duplex ultrasound is the most important investigation in screening. It is a first-line modality which is commonly used. And whenever any patient is being taken up for a CABG surgery, you need to perform a carotid Doppler as a screening modality. I'll explain why you need to perform that. But screening all CABG patients is not cost-effective. But the yield of this screening can be increased in selected patients who have left mainstem disease, carotid bruit, and previous stroke or TIA. Why is it important for screening a CABG patient is that whenever any patient who is going for CABG, you need to examine for the pulses in radial pulses. Whenever there are weak or absent, you need to get a duplex ultrasound assessment of the subclavian, innominate, and vertebral arteries. Why you need to get it done is because there's something called as post-operative coronary steal syndrome. That is, whenever there's a plaque or stenosis at the subclavian artery origin, once you perform the CABG surgery, there will be a steal of blood from the coronary circulation into the internal mammary artery graft, which will cause unstable angina on exertion and leading to this is called as post-operative coronary steal syndrome. Therefore, whenever you suspect any flow reversal or subclavian stenosis or something, you need to perform a further imaging with either a CT or an MRI, and that is compulsory and essential. This image gives you a better understanding. As you can see in this image, whenever there is a stenosis at the subclavian artery, there will be steal of blood from the left anterior descending artery to the IMA graft, leading to which can cause coronary steal syndrome. In this image, you can further see there will be a reversal of flow from the vertebral artery also whenever there is a stenotic plaque at the subclavian origin. Now, what is the indication of duplex ultrasound in trauma? The neck is divided into 3 zones. Zone 1 is anywhere between the clavicle and the cricoid cartilage. Zone 2 is between cricoid cartilage and angle of mandible. Zone 3 is between the angle of mandible and base of skull. Your duplex is only useful in the zone 2 injuries. In zone 1 and zone 3, it is unreliable. Next indication is in the carotid body tumor or the glomus vagal tumor. Duplex ultrasound is ideal for diagnosing carotid body tumors, but whenever you suspect on duplex ultrasound, it should be further confirmed by either a CT or MRI. You can't base your come to a conclusion only on this duplex ultrasound. Why is it? Because CT or MRI will help you in diagnosing bilateral lesions and the extent of the lesion. Why is extent of the lesion is very important? Because whenever there are large distally placed lesion, your surgical strategy will entirely differ because you need to plan for a preoperatively for a temporomandibular subluxation for a distally placed lesion. Your duplex will not give information about the extent of the lesion. And whenever a glomus vagal tumor is suspected, you can preoperatively only counsel the patient about the risk of vagus nerve division during surgery. And glomusvagal tumor will have numerous vascular serpiginous feeding vessels which track down the proximal vagus nerve. Carotid body tumor will cause splaying of the carotid bifurcation on the duplex, whereas glomusvagal tumor do not splay the bifurcation, but they tend to cause the displacement of the distal ICA. This is the A image is a B mode image where you can see a large, well-defined hypoechoic tumor causing splaying of the carotid bifurcation. B, C, D are the color flow Doppler images showing the splaying along with the color Doppler images. Now, the next indication is in the role in the planning of surgical intervention. First, coming to carotid endarterectomy. Previously, of about 95% of the endarterectomies were undertaken only on the basis of duplex criteria. This can be done nowadays also, but provided certain criteria should be met, and the surgeon should be aware of the following. That is, the surgeon who's performing should, and the vascular laboratory, which is where it is being undertaken, it should be accredited, and it should have its own validated criteria for measuring stenosis severity. And they should be very sure of what method they are being used for the stenosis. That is either the NACIS criteria or the ECST criteria. And the surgeon should also be aware of the findings which suggest inflow or outflow problems or subocclusion. Whenever you find such problems, you need to further go and do a CT or MRI to confirm your findings. But in CAS, carotid artery stenting cannot be planned only using duplex ultrasound alone. That is because there will be a lot of anatomical considerations need to be taken before you perform a carotid artery stenting. And duplex ultrasound will not help you in knowing all the anatomical details. It can help you in certain findings such as knowing about an ipsilateral stenosis or the ECA patency, extent of contralateral disease, any tortuosity at the bifurcation. It can advise on plaque morphology and coexistent inflow and outflow problems. But it cannot provide information regarding the aortic arch, calcification at the great vessel origins, proximal CCA tortuosity, adequate distal landing zone for a filter embolic protection device, and the circle of Willis status. All the above information can be provided only by either a CT or an MRI. But what's the problem is that in any symptomatic patient, when you want to perform a treatment very early, there will be delay in getting a CT or MRI at certain places. If you are anticipating such delays, you better go treat the patient with the endarterectomy rather than employing the carotid stenting. Now, the next indication is in evaluating plaque morphology. This I've already discussed in the previous class, the Grayville classification, type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 4. Type 1 is echolucent, predominantly echolucent. As you all know, type 1 and type 2 are very dangerous, and type 3 and type 4 are okay. I mean, the risk is very less. Next is in the symptomatic patients, whenever there is a large lipid core or a grayscale median is less than 25, the risk of recurrent neurological events in the 48, there will be high risk in the 48 to 72-hour time period. And in the asymptomatic patients, ability to identify higher risk for stroke patients is important, as it is believed that up to 95% of interventions in asymptomatic patients are ultimately unnecessary. This is again in 60% to 99% stenosis, the overall plaque area and the annual risk of stroke correlation. With the high plaque area, there will be high risk of stroke, and juxtaluminal plaque area, when area is more, there will be high risk of stroke. Perioperative role, as I've told you, duplex ultrasound should be repeated prior to CA when it has been greater than 4 weeks, because to ensure that the ICA is not occluded, and to know finally conclude about the distal disease extension, because whenever there is distal disease, you need to know whether temporomandibular subluxation is required or not, and it fulfills an important internal validation role. Intraoperative duplex ultrasound enables completion assessment by knowing about the residual filling defects, undue turbulence, and evidence of any intimal flaps or residual stenosis. Coming to the postoperative role, it is actually invaluable in any postoperative neurologic deficit, because the problem is whenever you do an open surgery, there will be air trapped in the deep tissues, which interferes with insulation early after surgery. Therefore, diagnosing the exact cause of the deficit will be very difficult, but its role of duplex ultrasound is enhanced if combined with transcranial Doppler. But duplex ultrasound is useful in warning about the possibility of the late prosthetic patch infection. In fact, it is a first-line investigation. Whenever there is a prosthetic patch infection, there will be something called as patch corrugation, which can be seen in the duplex ultrasound, and you can identify small leaks leading into a false aneurysm. These actually precede the clinical diagnosis of patch infection by almost up to a year. Therefore, when the clinician is the radiologist is very perfect in his imaging skills, he can diagnose patch corrugation, which you can see in this image, and the small leaks leading into a false aneurysm. Now, what are the contraindications? There are actually no contraindications. The only thing is that the operator should be adequately trained. What are the limitations? As I told you, the experience and skill of the operator is the first limitation. And the second limitation is that various laboratories use wide array of stenosis threshold. Therefore, there will be different criteria for diagnosing carotid stenosis. And the third is you should know whether you are using an ECST criteria or the NACES criteria. As you can see in this image, the ratio or the lumen in the NACES criteria is A minus B by A, whereas in the ECST it is C minus B by C. So the stenosis severity differs when you take NACES and ECST into consideration. And finally, there should be certain caution exercise whenever you are interpreting duplex ultrasound findings. Those are when there is an inability to image above the plaque, and whenever there are dampened waveforms in the proximal CCA that suggest inflow stenosis, and whenever there is high resistance flow in the distal ICA, which suggests a distal tandem lesion, whenever there is a contralateral occlusion or very severe stenosis on the opposite side, and whenever there is excessive calcification, because this prevents accurate velocity measurements due to acoustic shadowing, and suspicion of subocclusion. The subocclusion is very important. Because there's something called a subocclusion in a chronic subocclusion and a subocclusion in a hyperacute period, that is in the first 7 to 14 days after the onset of symptoms. Because the treatment aspect totally differs. In a chronic subocclusion, it is a severe ICA stenosis which does not open into a normal caliber lumen. In this chronic subocclusion, treatment is actually not necessary. Whereas in a subocclusion in a hyperacute period, you need to know you need to treat that patient. The critical difference occurs in the hyperacute period. There will be high peak systolic and end diastolic velocities across the stenosis. Whereas in chronic subocclusions, there will be very low peak systolic velocity with no diastolic flow. Therefore, whenever there is any doubt in this hyperacute situation, you can confirm it by doing a CT or MRI, because this confirmation is mandatory, because as I told you, this type of subocclusion needs to be treated and revascularization is appropriate. Coming to the next imaging modality, that is magnetic resonance imaging or magnetic resonance angiography. What is the main advantage of MRI is that there will be no exposure to radiation, and bony structures are not present. This is like a double-edged thing. At times it is disadvantage. The advantage is that there is no need for any complicated post-processing imaging. The advantage, adjacent soft tissue structures are not well visualized unless unsubtracted or additional MRI imaging is performed. And the biggest disadvantage of MRI is that calcium is not well defined. The first indication, that is carotid disease. There's something called as time of flight MRI and contrast MRI. The time of flight MRI is not very advantage when compared to duplex ultrasound. Almost it is similar. That is, for a 70 to 90% stenosis, it almost gives identical data. For 50% to 69% stenosis, it is even more poor. And two-dimensional MRI provides strong vascular signals even when the flow is low. This is useful for differentiating occlusion from subocclusion. Whereas a three-dimensional MRI offers better spatial resolution for measuring stenosis severity and enables assessment of flow directionality in steel phenomena. The disadvantage of TOF MRI is that the field of view is restricted, and you can't get a single image covering right from the aortic arch to the circle of Willis. You need to get either two further acquisitions to image the aortic arch great vessels and the circle of Willis. But contrast enhanced magnetic resonance imaging angiography as compared to TOF MRA uses has certain advantage. That is, it uses gadolinium contrast. Images are obtained more rapidly. It incurs fewer flow-related artifacts. It provides a greater field of view. It retains the ability to evaluate flow directionality. It has superseded TOF MRA, and it can be combined with MR brain imaging. And whenever you whenever you find an infarction on CT or MR brain, you need to treat this patient early because there is a high risk of early recurrent stroke. And there's something called as ABCD2 scoring, which tells about the risk of the stroke in the 48-hour and the 7-day strict. So this is the score. A is age, B is blood pressure, C is clinical presentation, D is duration of symptoms, and further D is diabetes mellitus. Each will be given a scoring parameter. The maximum score is 7, and the risk increases as the score increases. As I told you, any infarction or CT or brain indicates, along with this ABCD2 score, indicates that there's an increased risk of early recurrent stroke. What is in vertebrobasilar disease indication is that it helps us in knowing about the flow directionality. The biggest advantage of MRI when compared to CT is that it helps in knowing about the flow directionality. Therefore, it is useful in evaluating steal phenomena. But the problem is that it is limited by artifacts at the vertebral artery origins, either due to vessel tortuosity, respiratory motion, or cardiac pulsation. So finally, even in vertebrobasilar disease, MDCT, CT is the preferred investigation. There is no role in screening as it is not cost effective. In the trauma also, it is very rarely undertaken because of the prolonged acquisition times, the very far location of the MR imaging, and poor access to an unstable patient. In the carotid body tumor, a glomus tumor, it provides basic information which is actually useful in planning surgical management. But even in this carotid body or glomus tumors also, CT is the best imaging modality, purely because it gives best anatomical imaging with its relationship to adjacent bony structures. But the advantage of MR is that it provides excellent soft tissue contrast resolution when compared to CT. It helps us in knowing whether there is any intracranial extension of the lesion. Now, what is the use in the planning of surgical intervention? There is no additional role as compared to duplex ultrasound. Only when duplex ultrasound studies are non-diagnostic, people prefer CT when compared to MRI. In carotid artery stenting, contrast enhanced magnetic resonance angiography is preferable to conventional spiral CT, but CT is accepted to be superior because of its versatility. As I've told you, it gives better anatomical imaging. It also helps us in knowing about calcification, vessel tortuosity, but the ability to perform functional brain imaging and during one period of data acquisition. Now, what are the limitations of MRI? Whenever there are any vessel anomalies, MRI can diagnose these vessel anomalies, but when these vessel anomalies are occluded, MRI is not very useful. And there will be multiple vessels included in the final image. Therefore, for any beginner, overall image interpretation will be very difficult. And as I told you, MRI can never tell about calcification. Now, this is what I tried to tell you. This is a CT image where you can actually see, because in relation to the bony anatomical landmarks, in the MRI, there will be numerous vessels which can be seen. Therefore, the interpretation of the imaging will be very difficult. This I have covered in the previous class of about plaque morphology. That is, MRI is better in knowing about fibrous cap and lipid core. It is also helpful in intraplaque hemorrhage. So I'm not going to the details of it. The next is perioperative role. There is no role for MR in any perioperative setting. Post-operative role, MR does not have any role in any patient suffering a neurologic deficit after CEA or CAS, but there will be certain exceptions. That is, whenever you suspect a hyperperfusion syndrome stroke. Because whenever there is a hyperperfusion syndrome stroke, the problem with CT is that it gives it as an evolving ischemic infarct. But when you perform a perfusion MR imaging, you actually find that it is a normally perfused tissue. And what low attenuation you see on CT is actually a vasogenic edema as opposed to the cytotoxic edema. I'll discuss this in detail when we go to a CT. Certain new hyperintense white matter lesions can be documented in the early period. That indicates there is some amount of microembolization. Finally, MR angiography has no role in surveillance after CEA or CAS purely because it is not at all cost effective. What are the contraindications of MR? General contraindications as applied to anything. That is, whenever there are selected metallic implants, whenever patient is claustrophobic, obesity who can't fit into the scanner, and whenever there is chronic renal impairment, because whenever you give gadolinium, there's a risk of nephrogenic systemic fibrosis. Now, what are the limitations of MRI? Limitations of TOF MRI is that MRI always overestimates stenosis severity. And as I've told you, you require multiple image acquisitions to actually note right from aortic arch to the circle of Willis. And there will be certain artifacts which hinder the image qualification, image quality. Limitations of MR angiography. As I've told you, the calcification can't be known. There will be difficulties in identifying certain tandem lesions. Anomalous vessels that have been occluded will not be known properly. Lack of availability and the need for specific sequences and hardware. The next imaging modality is computer tomographic angiography. The first indication is carotid artery disease. CT is less likely to overestimate stenosis when compared to MRI. Therefore, CT has revolutionized, and multi-detector CT angiography has revolutionized the role of CT angiography because it is extremely fast, that it takes only 5 seconds to perform any scan from aortic arch to circle of Willis, and it is cheaper when compared to MRI. It offers sub-millimeter spatial resolution, and production of it enables the production of high-quality reformatted images, which are quite easy to interpret when compared to MRI, and this can be done in faster processing times. It gives very good anatomical detail, as I've told you. It can also demonstrate vascular anomalies even if occluded. But the problem with MRI is that occluded vascular anomalies cannot be known. It also tells us about the extent of vessel calcification. The next indication is vertebrobasilar disease. CT presents a challenge in diagnosing vertebrobasilar disease because the problem is that of the tortuous course of the vertebral artery. The vertebral arteries are generally enclosed in a thick bony coverings, and about the adjacent veins, large variation in normal vessel caliber, and it is not unusual to find a vertebral artery which is hypoplastic. CT provides better images of the extra and intracranial vertebrobasilar system than MR angiography. Important advantage is that it retains bony landmarks and vessel coverings. Vessel tortuosity is easily demonstrated, but there is no problem with artifact at the vertebral artery origins. But the huge disadvantage of CT is that it provides no information on flow directionality. This flow directionality can be known only on MRI or the duplex ultrasound. Now, coming to its role in screening, there's no role of screening for CT in CT, as it is not cost effective and there will be a high risk of radiation exposure. In trauma also, CT provides an important role because it can provide important anatomical vascular imaging from arch to circle of Willis, because it gives a good anatomical imaging in relation with bony and soft tissue structures. In evaluating carotid body tumor or glomus-Weigel tumor, it is an optical imaging modality only purely because it gives very good information about the tumor extent, circulation, its anatomical relationships, the soft tissue relationship with the adjacent soft tissue structure. Therefore, it is more than enough to plan any safe surgical dissection only on the findings of a CT. Coming to the next indication, in evaluation of CEA or CAS, most of the CES can be performed without CT angiography. However, whenever there is evidence of inflow or outflow disease or excessive calcification on duplex ultrasound, CT can reliably provide the additional information to plan management. First surgical intervention, carotid artery stenting. CT is optimal non-invasive imaging modality for planning CAS because of its production for easily interpretable 3D images from aortic arch to circle of Willis, ease of demonstrating vessel tortuosities, abnormalities of any circle of Willis, patterns of helps us about knowing about the patterns of calcification in the aortic arch, Status of the great vessel origins. Unlike MRI, CT will also give information about occluded anomalous vessels arising from the aortic arch. Role in evaluating plaque morphology. As I've told you in the previous class, CT is not very useful in evaluating plaque morphology. MRI is better than CT. The only thing you can know about a plaque is that it helps us in identifying plaque ulcers. Certain other indications will be there where you can identify carotid artery wall thickness, where you can suspect an increased risk of stroke. Perioperative role, there is absolutely no role for CT in a perioperative setting. Postoperative role, CT plays an important role in any patient suffering a neurologic deficit, either after CEA or CAS. You need to broadly classify whether this deficit is in the first 12 hours or after 12 hours. Because in the first 12 hours, the likelihood of intracranial hemorrhage or hyperperfusion syndrome is very remote. Therefore, the patient should be immediately considered for re-exploration, and it should not be delayed to perform a CT scan. As I told you, after 12 hours, the most common cause will be either an intracranial hemorrhage or the hyperperfusion syndrome. Intracranial hemorrhage, CT can readily diagnose, but the problem arises whenever there is a hyperperfusion syndrome. As I've told you in the discussion on MRI, in hyperperfusion syndrome, CT displays areas of low attenuation in the posterior fossa, which are actually misinterpreted as evolving infarction. But when you perform an MRI study, it is not actually an infarct, but it is white matter edema you actually see is a vasogenic edema and not a cytotoxic edema. Now, this is the image which tells you about this. So in the A image, you can see white matter edema in the posterior circulation. And in the B image, you can see a petechial hemorrhage in the right frontal region. As I've told you, this white matter edema in the hyperperfusion syndrome is often mistaken for an evolving infarct, which is actually not. So once you exclude ICH, intracranial hemorrhage and hyperperfusion syndrome, the next most common cause will be a thromboembolic reason. But whenever after 12 hours, duplex imaging will be very difficult to interpret because of the air in the deeper tissues, edema overlying the hemostatic gauze. Therefore, after 12 hours, whenever you think that there is any thromboembolic phenomena and there is some local pathology in your surgical site, you require a CT to confirm it and intervene properly. CT has no role in serial surveillance after CEA and CAS just because it is not cost effective. Contraindications, general contraindications, that is any patient who has allergic reactions to contrast agents and any patient who has impaired renal function. What are the limitations of CT? Need for IV contrast. It does not give any information on flow directionality, excessive exposure to radiation. There are certain situations which cannot reliably provide accurate diagnostic imaging information. That is tandem siphon disease or stenosis within the coil segments of the ICA. This is very important, these two conditions, because my next imaging modality, which I'm going to discuss, will actually helps us in knowing these things. That is digital subtraction angiography, which remains the gold standard in diagnosis whenever there is any tandem lesion or stenosis within the coiled segments of the ICA. Next imaging modality is digital subtraction angiography. It was previously the gold standard prior to surgery, but the problem with this was that there was almost high incidence of angiographic related strokes which were occurring. Therefore, this has lost its gold standard importance after CT and MRI have come. But of late, these angiographic related deficits have declined because of improved technology and better case selection. The first indication, there is no role in modern of carotid artery disease. DSA does not find any role in modern cerebrovascular practice, but there are certain situations where DSA can provide valuable diagnostic information. As I have already told you, that is whenever there is severe distal ICA disease and whenever there is marked coiling of the ICA in the upper reaches of the neck. In both these case scenarios, both MRI and CT will provide misleading information. The thing is, the first one, whenever there is distal ICA disease, there will be slow flow through any tiny lumen, which is often missed on CT or MRI, and it will be shown like it is completely occluded, that is 100% stenosis. But one more condition is that whenever there is marked coiling of the ICA in the upper reaches of the neck, that is the distal ICA. The problem is that whenever you are interpreting any image on CT or MRI, while interpretation, there will be an artifact introduced during image processing, which misinterprets that the patient is having significant carotid disease, which is actually not. This image will tell you clearly. This is a CT image, CT MIP image, which shows a normal bifurcation and a distal looped ICA with inflow and outflow stenosis, which is shown by the arrows. And this is a three-dimensional image, which is also of the CT, which is also showing inflow stenosis and an outflow stenosis. But now when you perform a digital subtraction angiography, you see that this coiled ICA is actually normal without any stenosis. So CT, whenever there is like coiled ICA, there will be artifacts which will be there, which will be show as stenosis. But when you perform a digital subtraction angiography, there will be no stenosis. Coming to the indication of vertebrobacillar disease, there is no role of DSA in vertebrobacillar disease. There is absolutely no role in screening also. In trauma also, it is not generally considered. Previously, it was the first line imaging, but as CT has come, this role has gone because CT you can perform in less than 5 seconds. But DSA remains a secondary option whenever there is image quality is compromised or image is difficult to interpret. In carotid body tumor, glomus vagal tumor also, there is no role as it provides no information on any extent or operability. The only indication is that whenever you're planning for a preoperative embolization or whenever you're planning to insert a covered stent into the ECA to decrease the incidence of perioperative bleeding. In the planning of CEA and CAS, coming to the first surgical intervention, that is CEA, most centers perform majority of CEAs without any preoperative digital subtraction angiography because of the advent of CT and MRI in knowing about the meta imaging. In CAS, need for a diagnostic angiogram will inevitably delay the treatment when you choose digital subtraction angiography. And there's one more risk that the patient will be exposed to two catheterization procedures. In plaque morphology, digital subtraction angiography has no role except in knowing that it gives little information about the plaque irregularity. The perioperative role, intraoperative completion angiography can identify technical errors, but this has also been superseded by color duplex ultrasound imaging or angioscopy, only because performing a completion angiography is actually cumbersome because it requires the presence of a CM, a radiology technician, and unnecessary exposure to radiation. But on-table angiography is useful in certain situations. So whenever you are diagnosing any carotid thrombosis or acute distal dissection in the early postoperative period after CEA or CAS. Because whenever there is carotid thrombosis, early re-exploration is required, that is preferably within 1 hour. Why this is diagnosing carotid thrombosis is important because the surgeon should be aware that he should not manipulate the carotid bifurcation too much because excessive manipulation will increase the risk of embolization. And in distal dissection, it usually follows shunt trauma in carotid endarterectomy. Diagnostic angiogram can be immediately followed by insertion of a stent or covered stent into the true lumen. Postoperative role, there is no role for the DSA in the serial surveillance of patients after CEA or CAS. Contraindications, the same contraindications as CT, that is any allergic reaction to iodinated contrast media. Limitations is that nowadays DSA has only become a supporting role because of the following limitations: because of its exposure to radiation, because of the delay in performing its study, because of the risk of angiographic related neurologic events, risk of access complications, and risk of contrast-induced nephropathy. The last imaging modality, that is transcranial Doppler. The indication in carotid artery disease, transcranial Doppler basically gives information about middle cerebral artery velocity. Therefore, whenever you suspect a stenosis, you can know about the hemodynamic effect of the stenosis actually has by measuring the increase in MCA velocity in response to intravenous administration of acetozolamide. the only imaging modality which can actually diagnose spontaneous in vivo embolization is transcranial Doppler. So in an asymptomatic carotid disease, you can keep a transcranial Doppler and diagnose spontaneous embolization which are occurring. This helps us in knowing about the group of patients who are at high risk of stroke. In recently symptomatic patients, you can, whenever you find any spontaneous embolization, you can come to a conclusion that the plaque is highly unstable and it requires an immediate surgical intervention. Coming to the next indication, vertebrobasilar disease. Previously, it was done in patient who was reporting any isolated dizziness or vertigo following head movements. But of latest reports, it has found that most of these patients have actually inner ear pathology and not vertebrobasilar TIAs. In trauma, there is no proven role of transcranial Doppler. In intraoperative monitoring, it warns of, as I told you, this is the most important function or advantage of transcranial Doppler. It warns about an embolization, but it cannot prevent a stroke due to embolization. The role of TCD monitoring, but this is only during carotid artery endarterectomy. Its role in carotid artery stenting has not been clarified. Now, what is the role of TCD during CEA? It helps us in knowing about the spontaneous embolization. It also helps us in knowing whether the shunt is working because 3% of the stents malfunction following insertion. It helps us in knowing mean carotid artery velocity, that is, it should be greater than 15 centimeters per second. And it also helps us in knowing the thrombosis of their ICA even before the operation is completed. How is like this is the transcranial Doppler tracings which actually see. As you can see in the first image of A, the mean velocity just after the carotid clamping, the middle cerebral artery velocity falls to 24 centimeters per second. And once carotid endarterectomy is performed, the MCA velocity is increased to 64 centimeters per second. And just within 12 minutes, you can see that the mean middle cerebral artery velocity is falling to 41. Just like within 30 minutes, it has almost reached to the previous velocity before after carotid clamping. So whenever you find such tracings, you can come to a conclusion that your carotid artery has been thrombosed at the site of surgery. Now, role in evaluating post-operative stroke, either in intraoperative stroke, TCD came to a conclusion that 20% of the strokes were due to hemodynamic failure and 80% were due to thromboembolic phenomena. If TCD-derived MCA velocity is now the same as observed during carotid clamping, it is highly likely that the carotid artery has thrombosed. And if MCA velocity is unchanged with ongoing embolization, you should suspect that there is a evolving thrombus within the endarterectomy zone, and both these scenarios will warrant immediate re-exploration. In the post-operative stroke, etiology of any post-operative stroke is multifactorial. As I've told you, after 24 hours, the most common cause will be either an intracranial hemorrhage or the hyperperfusion syndrome. In both the scenarios, there is no TCD protocol which has come into force, and it cannot reliably prevent either of these. Thank you.